Joining me now is Thane Rosenbaum. He's a Middle East analyst, and he's here in studio with us. Thane, nice to have you.
Michelle, always a pleasure.
Thane, first, I want to get your reaction to what we just heard from Nina regarding the UN vote there.
Well, I thought it was excellent reporting. Look, it wouldn't be a Wednesday in New York if the General Assembly wasn't condemning Israel. We shouldn't be surprised by this. Nina's correct. This is a non-binding vote. This is not a Security Council resolution that would have required an American veto. It's purely symbolic in its significance, and it's there to create high drama and theater in condemning Israel. The interesting piece, which Nina also reported, was the fact that Ambassador Haley attempted to insert an amendment that would have balanced the resolution.
Well, Thane, we're quite used to the UN taking a very biased or strong position against Israel, but how does it make sense to leave Hamas out of this? The reality is that Hamas fired over 100 rockets at Israeli civilians along with Islamic Jihad. One fell into a kindergarten yard just an hour or so before the kids were due to arrive. So it's not for lack of trying on Hamas's part. And of course, there's also Hamas's role in inciting the violence during those riots on the Gaza border, telling people to carry weapons, urging them to cross the border, to go to the civilian communities, kidnap Israelis. Let's assume that we can maybe understand how the UN isn't breaking away from its criticism of Israel, but explain why there's no inclination to include Hamas here.
Well, frankly, that was well said, and this isn't exactly what Ambassador Haley was saying. This just demonstrates the intellectual dishonesty of the General Assembly, that you would deliberately, intentionally ignore the other piece of this story, that even if you did think that Israel was using excessive, disproportionate, indiscriminate force, which they're not, but even if you did, you can't ignore Hamas from the story because of the incitement of violence, the launching of rockets, and the digging of tunnels, all at Israeli civilians. So without even invoking the name Hamas, it displays the kind of fecklessness. Look, the General Assembly today, there was reports today that there's a humanitarian crisis in Yemen that is exploding, right? UN wasn't interested in that. They're not interested in mass murders in Syria, in North Korea, in Iran, in Turkey. They're interested in Israel.
Not when Syria is leading the disarmament conference. That speaks volumes about the credibility of the United Nations. But let's move on. As we reported, Jared Kushner, Jason Greenblatt, they're on their way to the Middle East. Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Israel are on the agenda. Are we expecting them to be pushing forward the peace plan, if you will?
North Korea this week, Israel next week. Right. The ambitions of this administration never wane. Look, I wouldn't count these people out, right? I mean, who knows? Maybe this very unorthodox attempts to deal with global diplomacy surprises people. And when you surprise people, maybe you get something done that's different. One of the things that your reporting also established is that we have no idea what the United States is going to propose. It's all like inside a Cracker Jack box. We've never learned, and we have no idea whether anything's going to be different. The Palestinians maintain that they're not coming to the table. They're still wounded by the recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's eternal capital. Hamas is unmovable. In many ways. The Palestinian Authority is completely in chaos and destabilized. The question is, whatever it is that the United States does propose, who can enforce it? Who has the leverage over the Palestinians?
Who does it even propose it to? To your point, right. Fatah, the Palestinian Authority, and Hamas are very much at odds with each other. So there still is no any kind of unified body to even propose it to the Palestinians, assuming that they do decide to change their minds and stop the boycott of U.S. officials. So is this dead on arrival?
It seems to. I mean, they've essentially avowed, the Palestinians, that they have no interest in whatever it is that the United States seeks to propose. The question is whether the Arab League, the question, the Egyptians, which I've said before on your program, I think the Egyptians are the wild card here. They may, in fact, reassert their dominance in the Middle East like they did in the decades of my childhood and actually become a real player in terms of diplomacy. They might, because of their sharing a border with Gaza, have some leverage. But at this point, no one really is speaking for the Palestinians, and the Palestinians have not changed their tone about their desire to wipe Israel off from the map.
Assuming that the Saudis and the Egyptians are on board with this, to your point that Egypt's looking to play a bigger role, do you think that they can coerce the Palestinians to cooperate here?
You know, I don't know. The problem with the Gazans is they're not happy with Gaza. You know, they want Tel Aviv, they want Jaffa. Until the fundamental intentions for statehood are established among the Palestinians, a recognition that they're not getting Israel, that there is, in fact, going to be a two-state solution. To me, this has always been the biggest stumbling block, and the thing that the world seems to ignore. It's unless the Palestinians themselves can reconcile themselves to the idea that they are going to have to live as neighbors with the Israelis, I don't think the Saudis or the Egyptians are going to have much success.
Well, you didn't get a sense of that coming from the Hamas leaders ahead of those violent riots calling for the return of, quote, all of Palestine. So you didn't get a sense that they were accepting any form of recognition, any change on their end.
Look, the fact that these protests are called the March of Return said everything you needed to know. The fact that they were actually saying we're returning to places in Israel that theoretically will never come to us, but that's our aspiration, that's our intention. It sent the strongest message of what their aspirations are.
Thane, thank you so much. Middle East analyst Thane Rosenbaum.
Thank you, Michelle.
Appreciate your analysis. All right, stick around.